So my HbA1c is 46, which would be a problem for the majority of people. However, because I have diabetes, that's not really much of an issue. Well, it is, but it's to be expected. But what I thought was, for people watching this who are considering what is pre-diabetic, what is insulin resistance, how do I reverse that naturally, how do I monitor it and make sure that I am doing so safely, I thought to make this video because it's something that I live with daily, and a lot of people are either not tested or aware of it, and when they are, they don't really know what to do with that information. So I'll do it in a casual manner, as I'm trying to do with a lot of my videos. So yeah, I've got diabetes, so me having a HbA1c of 46 it's no better for me having it slightly raised than the general population because I'm diabetic. It just means that it's better than it being in a full diabetic range. I think that's what I was trying to get at before. But for those who don't know, HbA1c is a blood marker. It's what we use to assess your blood sugar over the past 3 to 6 months. It's not perfect, but it does give us a good idea of what it has been doing, as opposed to just getting a random blood test on each day. It gives us a good average over a prolonged period of time. And the ranges, so this is UK based because we use it in millimoles per mole. If you are in the US or Canada, you'll be in percentages. But for the UK, for example, from 42 millimoles per mole up to, but not including 48, is classed as pre-diabetes. 48 and above is what we class as diabetes then. So like I said before, 46 right in the pre-diabetic range. And if you haven't got that diagnosis and you've never been seen, it's obviously worth going in to get checked to make sure that it isn't progressing onto diabetes. But if not, it's normally a sign of metabolic dysfunction. So now you're aware of where you should be with HbA1c. Ideally, you should be between 20, 22, up to 41. Ideally, you'd want to be within the high 20s, low 30s. That's where I would love to be, but I've never been in previously. Now, this all starts from insulin resistance, and this is a big thing. It comes up in a lot of social media posts, and a lot of people oversimplify what insulin resistance is. And in reality, a lot of people, even the top people in healthcare, don't really understand what insulin resistance is at a level where you can then help other people. So there are numerous places where insulin resistance can work or take effect. The main place I'm going to discuss, or the main places, are muscle and the liver. And one concept that a lot of people struggle to understand is that each person can feel the effects of lifestyle, genetic disorders at different levels, and each person has their own threshold, because a lot of people assume type 2 diabetes as people who are generally obese, lack of activity, poor diet, which is, I would say, right for about 90% of the population. However, there is a 10% portion of that population who, some of them may even be anorexic, and it's all due to fat disorders. It's the inability to utilize energy correctly, which then predisposes them and then leads to type 2 diabetes. So what happens is, once you eat a meal, so I've just made a coffee here, it's got some sugar in it, well, in the form of oat milk, but once that goes into the body then tells that there's some energy coming in, normally in the form of sugar and protein and fats, so we need to release insulin. Insulin then basically stores energy within the system. That is what insulin is. It's a storage hormone. So if you ever think of a type 1 diabetic, we start diagnosing them when they're eating too much, they are drinking too much in terms of fluids, and they are not putting on enough weight, and that's because they're not able to store energy. So when it comes in a normal function or a normal system, that's what's happening. But in certain people, when you are storing insulin, well, when you're using insulin to store energy, you can then develop fat within muscle cells. And once you start to develop fat within a muscle cell, it then turns off all the signaling. Basically, it doesn't allow energy to come into the cell for you to store it. And then what happens there is the sugar stays into the system, gets converted into fat, and then that then basically triggers this vicious cycle. So I always tell people diabetes, insulin resistance, is a disorder of fat, not really of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the thing that we sort of measure to see how bad the system is. But essentially, insulin resistance is where you've got too much fat within the muscle cell, and eventually goes into the liver, goes into the pancreas, and then the body doesn't really have the same response to insulin. So the body starts making its own sugar, even though we've got enough sugar in the system, which means your blood sugar rises. The effects of insulin just doesn't work in terms of storing it, so then you have higher blood sugar anyway. There is an increased amount of fat being dissolved from fat cells. It's the most counterintuitive thing that can happen from a metabolic point of view, but that's what happens. The body has a fail-safe, and once you override it, it becomes dysregulated. So that's what happens. It's just basically we've got too much fat. I think that's the simplest way that you can look at it, because then this allows you to then manage it going forward, because there's a few things you can do. It's about aerobic activity, and you've got lean mass. Obviously diet comes into it, and I'll add that on at the end. But when it comes to aerobic activity, if your muscle cells are in a state where they can use fat for energy at a more efficient rate, because that's what's happening. Me speaking to you now, sitting here, or if I go walking around, I don't use carbohydrates as the predominant energy source. I use fats because fats are highly abundant in energy. They do take a lot longer to oxidize, meaning it takes longer to take the energy from a fat molecule and put it into usable formats. However, once you do it, you've got a greater abundance of energy to do so. But that's why we always do it when we are at low intensities, such as me sitting here speaking to you now. But if you increase the amount of aerobic activity that you're doing, you then increase the threshold at which you can utilize fats as an energy source, and you then increase the efficiency, and less fat is likely to accumulate within the muscle cell, which then reduces insulin resistance. Very simplistic, but that is the general consensus. So the first thing to do is, can you do zone 2 training? Any training, but zone 2 training is really effective for fat oxidation. It used to be called the fat burning zone. Best ways to do it are a brisk walk, could be on a treadmill, could be outside walking your dog, could be a light jog, row, whatever you can do aerobically where you can still hold a conversation, but you're not able to do it as comfortably as I'm doing it now. You should be slightly out of breath, but able to complete the conversation you're having in full sentences. If you don't want to speak in a gym because you look a bit odd, you can do the breathing test, where you should be able to nasally breathe in and out throughout the whole activity. As soon as you start requiring the mouth to breathe, then you are potentially going into zone 3 and you start using another energy source. So zone 2 training is really good for insulin resistance. The next one is muscle mass, and this is a key one, because muscle, once you stimulate it, whether it be jog, weightlifting, you can get energy into the cell without the need for insulin, because the muscle cell contracts. It puts these transporters on the membrane, which allows energy to come into the cell, or sugar to come into the cell to be used for energy, which is highly effective. And that is why people who are diabetic, who are on insulin, we ask them to monitor their insulin levels during exercise, because it can be lowered due to this effect. So if you increase the amount of muscle mass and activity, you are then allowing the body to remove more energy from the blood and put it to good use. The other thing is that if you've got a large reservoir to store energy, which is usually the muscle, then you've got less of an impact when, how would you put it? You've got more storage, so there's a less likelihood of it becoming full and then impairing or impeding the system of insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance. So having increased muscle mass through weightlifting, the best way to do this is to try and do resistance training 2 to 3 times a week as a bare minimum. And people will go into the gym and wonder what to do. Don't worry about lifting dumbbells or barbells. Go onto the machines. As long as you are pushing the muscle to a point where you would rate it, I would say an 8 out of 10, and it's becoming fatigued. So let's take a chest press. If I was to sit down on a machine now and do chest press, as long as you're engaging that muscle and you can feel it burn, and you're not going to failure, because that's when injuries come in. That's why I say 8 out of 10. But if you do that and go home and come onto your diet in a second, you're going to build muscle mass. So ways to naturally reverse insulin resistance so far: zone 2 aerobic training and building muscle mass, and using weight building or weight exercises, because that's going to be an effective way to increase lean mass and improve insulin sensitivity. Now the next thing, again, probably the most accessible for a lot of people, is diet. So reduce the amount of saturated fat that you're having, reduce the amount of refined carbohydrates you're having, and reduce the amount of energy that you're having overall in your diet. And you can look into this. try and quote a couple of studies off the top of my head, but there's something called the twin cycle theory. They took type 2 diabetic patients and they restricted their calories. I think it was down to 1,600 calories a day. No, it was actually lower. I think it was 800 to 1,200 calories a day. Basically creating an energy deficit and allowing the body to utilize all the fat, remove it from the muscle, from the liver, and use it as energy before using it from the diet. And what happened was, because the muscle was then free of a lot of the fat, same with the liver, insulin sensitivity soon restored quite quickly. So the twin cycle theory from 2008. But also, if you think about the types of food, if you have saturated fat, it is less usable than the other forms of fat, and it's more likely to go on as energy, storage in terms of fat. And then you've got refined carbohydrates, which cause an insulin spike, which, as a lot of people are probably aware of now with all the social media posts, that insulin spikes are not ideal because they increase the amount of storage, and it can drive insulin resistance, because high amounts of insulin for a long period of time can cause insulin resistance as well through a similar pathway. So if you reduce them two things and increase the amount of protein to the higher end, I'm not saying anything ridiculous, probably 1.6 grams per kilo each day, then you are going to build muscle mass. More of your energy is going to come from protein. You're going to be more satiated because they're more fulfilling macronutrients. And if you have a balanced diet in general, you're going to have better regulation of your whole bodily functions anyway. I know this was a very, very quick tour, also because I've got a coffee here which I've not had a sip of yet. But insulin resistance is complex. Don't oversimplify it, but the ways about how you can reduce it without the need for medication, by all means. There will come a point in some people where you need medication. Do not be scared to take it. As long as you are doing it in conjunction with the things I've said, then that is going to be the best outcome for you. Because despite all the pharmacological and all the lifestyle advancements that we've made over the past 10, 15 years, previous, we are still having people who are diabetic die, I believe, 5 to 10 years sooner than what they would have done if they didn't have the condition. Diabetes is a very, very serious condition. I've got it, I try and palm it off, but at the end of the day, it's probably one of the worst things that you can inherit. So by improving your metabolic function, you are going to offset the consequences and complications of this condition. There are a lot of things that I can go into if anyone ever wants to go through it. I will be going through my own diabetes story as well, so I think that might help a few people. But yeah, like I said, look after your lifestyle first. If medication becomes an option and you need it, then GLP-1s, all these ones in the right formats, can be very beneficial. And it is something that I'm going to look into in the not too distant future, because at the end of the day, I need to make sure my health is as efficient and prioritised as I can be going into the later years of my life, because I'm in my 30s now. But as with all my videos, this was for informational purposes only. It's not medical advice. If you've got this far, I appreciate you watching. So thanks for watching. Any comments, put them below, and I will see you in the next one.